I think that's the first thing to ask. Like, what are our assumptions of what meditation is supposed to do? And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago about, again, there's really good things with meditation getting popularized, right? And then there's also some growing pains with that, right? And one of the growing pains is I think meditation gets often put into this bag of like, oh, like going to the spa, or like learning to relax, right? And all this stuff. And it of course it can help with that. And a lot, I would say the majority of people initially come to it for that reason. But also in my experience, meditation is about cultivating awareness. So there's this, we see more stuff, and that includes, stuff we like, and that includes stuff we don't. And I think that's the surprise, and probably you found this out in your practice too. That's kind of the surprise that some people don't tell you, because what's pitched is this thing: relax, feel better, blah blah blah.
Welcome to the Mindful Rebel podcast, your refuge for personal growth. We're all on a journey to reconnect and nurture the most authentic parts of ourselves. And in this podcast, we explore how these modern day rebels are using mindfulness to transform themselves and the world around them. Each episode will dive deep into personal interviews with social impact healers, teachers, creatives, and leaders. Through their stories and insights, you'll engage with powerful teachings to spark your mind, prompts to ignite your reflection, and techniques to integrate wisdom into your daily lives. Make sure you like, subscribe, review, and share this podcast while joining us at the intersection of mindfulness and social change that challenges the status quo, awakens our collective wisdom, and creates a world with peace, clarity, and freedom. Welcome to the Mindful Rebel podcast. My name is Shawn, and I'm excited to be here with you with a guest I'm excited to talk to today, Scott Tusa. Thank you for taking some time to connect and be in conversation and community today.
Oh, you're most welcome, Shawn. It's really a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
And I want to share with you where I first got connected to your work. So I think it was maybe last year. I got a chance to take the Buddhist psychology certificate with Nalanda Institute in Embodied Philosophy. And I really enjoyed that because it was a great sort of deep dive into Buddhist philosophy. And it was a deep dive in a very academic way, but then I also liked how it was paired with this very practical connection to Buddhism, which were the videos that you provided, and I was like, wow, like the way in which you simplify concepts or even brought them into the practical, there was something very powerful about that. Because I was like, I think the videos with Joe, I was like, okay, I'm taking down a lot of notes. I get this. Okay, need to revisit this. And then I'd watch the next video. I'm like, oh, that's connecting the dots. So I appreciate that real practical approach that you bring to your work. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, and that's good to hear. I aim for that kind of a bridge, and we get more into it, but I think that bridge is quite challenging in a way. I like to hold myself responsible, like not watering it down, but also making it, available and more practical. So I'm always challenging myself in that area. So I appreciate you notice that.
Yeah, I was definitely noticing. So, Scott, you have a very interesting sort of journey and path, right? Like moved from being a Buddhist monk ordained by the Dalai Lama to now transitioning into the work you're doing as a teacher practitioner, holding space, sharing different trainings, workshops, retreats, and different things like that. So what I always like to do to help set the context for the conversation is maybe create some space for you to talk a little bit about your journey, maybe what brought you into Tibetan Buddhism, and maybe what that looked like.
Yeah, no, I always am thinking real quick, should I do the short, medium, long version? I'll just do a version. We'll
Yeah,
see.
you're
You
fine.
feel free to interrupt if it's too long. Yeah, basically, I think, I usually frame it like this. I mean, the truth is, we all encounter challenges on different levels in this life. I feel like this life, mainly my practice is about learning to face those challenges with dignity, and wisdom and compassion, and navigate them more skillfully and learn more about, what this life is all about and how to, help myself and others. So my own story is my own, but of course, I just want to acknowledge we all have our own backgrounds and our own, no one's is, I don't know if anyone's, how do you say it, origin story of their spiritual path is more worthy than another, right? Mine started with suffering, as I think for many people it does. It was the death of my mom when I was 15, who died from long battle with cancer. And yeah, it really started with a search. I was kind of my mom was always a spiritual person. I grew up like more Reformed Jewish, but it wasn't my thing. It was just more of a like a social, ethnic, cultural thing. It wasn't really a spiritual path for me at the time. I mean, it still isn't, but they wanted that in my life. But my mom also explored other things. And I think the spirit kind of stayed with me after about a year after she died. It's just this thirst to kind of know more. And not only to work with my own suffering in a more skillful way, but just to know like, what is this crazy ass world we're in? It's so if we right, if you step back, it's so weird sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Uh, it's just a crazy place we're in. I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean it's so dynamic. It's so varied. It's so like diverse when you look at the world, let alone the universe. So anyways, I got interested in that, and I'm a musician. So my dad's a musician. He's a jazz musician, actually. He's a bass player. And so I grew up with that from a really young age. And I started playing drums at 10. Um, and then I went more into like the metal punk rock kind of thing as a teenager. And after my mom's death, I started to kind of come back around to the jazz roots I was introduced to musically as a kid. And with that, more what world music. And I started studying Afro-Cuban, Brazilian percussion, as well as West African, music. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, so that was really happening at that time. They had a carnival in the city every year, and I would go participate in that. And so actually, kind of like as I was exploring different paths, my path started with a Afro-Cuban religion. So I got interested in Santeria, which is kind of all over the world now. It's spread everywhere, but really it's indigenous to Cuba, and comes from Yoruba people from Nigeria. And I don't know, this gave me, it was so foreign to my upbringing, but it gave me an ancestor practice to start working with. And the main thing that this did for me was heal a lot of that initial pain of losing my mom, and introduce me to another worldview that, you know, it's just so lacking, at least in the US these days. Like we have to recover kind of an ancestor practice, a lot of us, whatever our background is. Um, and so I did that for a bit, and then I went to music school in Boston, and to further my jazz studies and all kinds of music and world music. And yeah, I got interested in yoga, and then meditation, mindfulness, and then mostly like got interested in Hinduism, specifically. Have you heard of the book, The Autobiography of a Yogi by Yogananda?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the more I talked to people, I realized this book was a lot of this was the gateway or the doorway for a lot of people. It still is. And I wanted to be like these yogis. I was like, man, these guys are dope. I want to be a yogi. I want to, have like magical powers and all this stuff. And anyways, I quickly found out probably not. I won't probably get those, but that's okay. I got something else. And so, anyways, I was pursuing that, and I actually just started to open up to Zen Buddhism, more like insight meditation in the US. And then eventually came across Tibetan Buddhism. And there was something that just like, I don't know, when something just like hits you in the face, like in a good way, just
Yeah.
like right? You can't ignore it. And it felt like familiar, it felt, wow, like this is me somehow, but it's also so foreign, right, to the cultures you and I grew up in, for instance, in the States. But I just felt so close, so familial, felt almost like family. And then I started to meet Tibetan teachers. I went the route of kind of like going direct to the I guess I would call it kind of indigenous lineage, meaning through Tibetan people, right? And that's primarily who my teachers have been. in that path. And so I ended up living with a monk from East Tibet who was a also known as what's a geshe, which is like a high degree in the monastery where they study for 20 plus years, and they get this degree. And he's an incredible scholar, but also incredible practitioner, just like a really beautiful human being. And I ended up becoming his cook for 3 years, and live with him in outside of Boston, just right outside in the suburbs, Massachusetts. And I just learned so much from this man, being able to be around him, all day long, studying with him. The public would come a few times a week and take classes. We do meditation, etc. And then I met my root teacher, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, shortly after that. And then, since then it's just been, forwarding that. And as you said, I became a monk at 28, and did that for 9 years, and then decided to go back to the householder life, and now I have a family and, work in that. So, yeah.
What prompted that transition from how you were showing up as a monk to sort of moving back into that householder's direction?
Oh, what prompted it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the main things were loneliness, you know,
Mm.
and just good old desire, good old, like, I want a partner, like just good old human nature, which at the time I felt really embarrassed about, and now I don't, because it's, of course, like sexuality and all these things need to be incorporated in our life. And by the way, when I was a monk, it was incorporated in my life. It was just in a way where I wasn't acting upon it externally with another person. I think some people get that misunderstanding that, like, when you're celibate, you're not sexual. No, you're very sexual. It's just you're working with it in this very intense way because you have a boundary. And I think I had hit sort of I hit an obstacle, but also I just hit a point where I both just wanted to be more connected with people, and more friends. I also wanted a partner, and I think part of that, for some of the listeners out there who don't know too much about Tibetan Buddhist monasticism, most monasticism, I would say, like almost 100%, happens in a monastic community. Where you're living with other monks, or if it's female monastics, they're living with other nuns, and you share everything, and you do activities together. So, of course you can get lonely there, but it's a little different, where my path was to go into solitary retreat. So when I became a monk, I went into 3 years of solitary retreats, and then another 6 years of, retreat throughout the year. So I was alone a lot. So I would be in retreat for these intense, periods of intensive meditation and study, and then I would come out and also be alone. So I think for me particularly, it was, if I would do it over, I would have gone to a monastic community and kind of like made that the center.
One of the things I want to pull on a thread that you shared as you were describing your journey, and it's the idea of suffering, right? And in terms of the Buddhist perspective, that's definitely like a core concept. And I guess for me, it's my academic side. I always like to operationalize terms. And I think suffering, and I can even say on my own personal journey, suffering was one that was a difficult concept to kind of grasp onto. And I think there was even initial shock. There's like, okay, you're saying like one of the marks of us showing up and living is like suffering is like a thing. There was a little friction in that in my like initial study. So I guess from your perspective, can you talk a little bit about suffering and maybe some of the nuance that's actually there?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, and I think this is probably like one of the bigger questions for most people when they encounter Buddhism, because we also bring our own lenses, individually, culturally, all of that, nationality, etc., to the word suffering. And I like to, in particular, this is why I prefer to use the word dukkha in relation to Buddhism, because the Sanskrit Pali word dukkha, it represents more than what we typically would label suffering in English, right? And it's as because you're studying it, it's complex, and that's the kind of hump to work with. We need to have some passion for working with the complexity of what dukkha is, because some of it is hard to understand. Like, usually I talk about it in 3 layers. We have suffering, or the dukkha of dukkha. We could also use the word dissatisfaction. That's fine too. that is kind of what most of us think of when we think of suffering, getting sick, aging, things not going our way, pain, emotional pain, physical pain, like all that kind of stuff we would typically put in that category. And most people, when they encounter the dukkha or suffering in Buddhism, they think of that first. But actually, of course, the teaching acknowledges that, but it's kind of obvious. We all know that. Why do we need to dwell on that? You know, some people get caught up in that, but actually, the teaching is more for exploring and discovering the subtler types of dukkha that we're not aware about and that we put a lot of energy into, we feed, and therefore we don't know how to get out of the round of pain. And this is what we call the dukkha of change and what we call pervasive, all pervasive dukkha, which I can go into, but I'll just take a moment there. Yeah.
Hmm. Thank you for sort of layering that out. And I think it's important to sort of understand that nuance around that. Now, I got a chance to watch, I believe it's on your podcast, on your YouTube page, the
Mhm.
conversation that you had with Sharon Salzberg, another one of my favorites, around the idea of anxiety in like the Buddhist context, right? And as somebody who experiences anxiety, I don't think I ever thought about where the connection of like Buddhist philosophy can maybe aid in the way in which we have a relationship with anxiety. So, can you talk a little bit about that and maybe like how the Dharma might hold tools for us to sort of work with that?
Yeah. No, and it relates back to what we were just talking about because anxiety is a form of dukkha. And we can see some of it is in that category of like it's by the word gross, I just mean obvious, like obvious and we don't like it, etc. But then there's these categories of like what's causing that. Mostly in Buddhism, we want to get down to the subtle level of understanding when we're interpreting ourself as separate from any relationship. I don't mean just human relationship, any relationship, what we perceive, what we think, our dreams, the sky, clouds, computers. When we're perceiving a separate subject and object, that creates anxiety at a subtle level, right? And so anxiety goes deep because we have the kind of what we initially think of as anxiety and fear, and then we have this deeper level. And so for me, just suffering from both, meaning like I got that deep one, just like we all do from a Buddhist perspective. But I also got, I've suffered from kind of chronic anxiety my whole life, and so I really like to talk about two levels here. There's the healthy human being level, and also the I could say the things that are going on in our times, the communities we grow up in or live in, the education systems, the economic systems we're beholden to and involved in. Those can all either serve to help our anxieties to lessen certain types, or they can exacerbate the problem. And so there's that level of just healing our anxiety and understanding it more, just how to be more grounded as a human being, right? And I think, this can be very personal, but I think also I notice collectively, at least in the US, a lot of us are really struggling with this. The culture is really fast and aggressive in general. I just mean the overall culture, if there is any, but let's just say it's fast. So this exacerbates the what we call the wind energy in the body. So in the Tibetan
Mhm.
systems, we understand it the body as physical, uh, and then energetic, which is sub-physical, and then mind, which is non-physical. And so we have to understand how those intersect together. Now, on the deeper level, of course, like the Buddhist path aims to, more long term work with that deeper existential anxiety of like, who am I? What am I? What am I supposed to do here? I mean, even the thought, we don't normally think of it this way, but in my opinion, even the thought, what do I do? Or what's right? What's wrong? What's my purpose? That all actually comes from anxiety, but
Hmm.
it's this deeper existential one, which isn't bad. I'm not saying that's bad, right? It's just something we have to work with.
Hmm. Has the in thinking about like meditation as a practice and a technique, are there ways in which meditation can help us sort of work with that directly? Yeah.
For sure. Both, you mean you want me to talk about both, like the upper healthy human being and the deeper one, or one in
Sure. Yeah.
particular? Yeah. So I mean, right now, actually, we're recording this in mid-April, 2024. I'm doing a course on I'm calling unwinding anxiety, and I'm really aiming to work with both. It's only our second week right now, so mainly what I'm doing is a set of practices that have really helped me for the last 12, 13 years, which are based in the breath and based in somatic practice. So, part of that, part of, my observation in my own body and just working with others for many years and kind of talking to them about their embodied experience is that inner speediness. It gets compounded by an inability to connect with the feeling world, and to be in our bodies in more subtle ways. And I think, to me, this is I call it a modern disease because it's not just American. It happens all over the world whenever we enter like a productivity mentality with our life, you know? And I'm not saying I mean, you and I have to do that, otherwise we can't do what we do, right? So
Yep.
it's learning to navigate the modern world in that way. And so I like to teach somatic practices for connecting the two, getting out of the kind of overthinking, ruminating mind into the feeling world and body, making friends with that, especially the places that are more scary and uncomfortable. So a set of practices for that, and then breath practices for um, balancing what we call in Tibetan the lung, which means, I already said the word, like we can translate it as wind energy, which is a part of that subtle body, which actually comes from ancient systems. I mean, both Tibetan medicine, Ayurveda, and these are old systems of medicine for understanding that triple body, mind, mental, physical, and energetic. So, so I think that's why, I think you're familiar with these too, like why pranayama practices work, breath practices work because they're working with the subtler lung or prana lung is the Tibetan word for prana, when we're working with the breath in certain ways. So I like certain versions of those for bringing that kind of anxious energy down, you know?
Mhm. One of the things I always like to ask other meditation teachers and practitioners is that, like, over the last few years, we've seen like a real big surge of folks of an interest in like meditation and mindfulness. Always joke and tell people like I was into meditation before it was cool, and when you kind of got picked on for for being interested in meditation, I was always the weird kid growing up. But with it sort of moving into like this level of popularity, is there anything that like practitioners or meditation teachers can help keep in mind um, as there becomes more of a swell of interest in meditation?
Wow, man, this is a big one. You want to? Are you down to spend the rest of the time? No, I'm just joking. This is a big one. This is a big one. I'll try to think of like the main ones, and I'll try to not complain too much. All right, I'll try to make it positive. Um, okay, I'll start with kind of one of my passions, and this is the area I choose to work in. Right, not saying you should or anyone else needs to or should. Um, because I've been doing this for almost 24, 25 years now, mainly in Tibetan Buddhist traditions. I don't, I view myself mainly as a student, you
Mm,
know, and I also view myself as a foreigner, meaning, obviously I'm not Tibetan. So it's not mine. And at the same time, Buddhism itself is not owned by Tibetans. It's not owned by anyone. You know what I mean? It's public knowledge, I guess you could say. But when it comes to lineage, and another way to think, another way one Tibetan Buddhist teacher expressed it this way, and I think it's a nice way to think of it. Lineage is also a form of ancestors. They're just not blood ancestors, you know? They're not body ancestors, right? They're ancestors of practitioners who have done the work, opened their mind, freed themselves, taught others how to free themselves. And when we enter these lineages, in my case, these indigenous Buddhist lineages, even as a foreigner, we enter that wave, which is both physical, because it's, you have people passing on those lineages. It's verbal in texts and teachings, and it's energetic. It's like something unspoken being held in a lineage which is bigger also than humans, I guess you could say, because we believe Buddhas are kind of like beyond human, I guess you could say that, you know? So anyways, so that's the one thing I feel is missing a little bit, because not always, we have a strong kind of culture in the United States. I can't really speak for anywhere else, but everywhere copies the US, obviously, you know. And we have a strong history of taking what's not ours, repackaging it. I would say colonizing it to a certain extent, but I'm not this kind of. I don't wish to call anyone out. I'm not going to do that. Just talk about myself, you know, right? Colonizing it, and then selling it, right? And I don't fault people for this anymore, because we're kind of trapped in this system where if we want to do, like you and I, we want to do something we love, and we think helps others, and we want to help others, and we need to survive based on that. What do? We have to work with this system as it is. So I used to be kind of a heavy deconstructionist, and kind of, I grew up in punk rock communities and in the Bay Area. It's like the most anarchist, stuff out there. And as I've grown older, I realized, no, that's not. You can't tear down the system. You got to work with it. If we tear it down, we're in danger. Like, you can create a lot of suffering from tearing something down too quickly. But again, this can be nuanced depending on the issue. So for me, I try to work within it, but at the same time, this would be my advice: understanding that if we want to go deep, these lineages, they have thousands of years of depth to teach us from. And these teachers, I'll just say indigenous. Indigenous, I just mean that's their culture, that's their body, right? It's not like they have the wisdom we don't. That's not what it's about. It's more like they're holding it down in a totally different way than we can. And connecting with that, as a student, I don't know how to say it. It's not like I don't feel like I'm lower than them. I just feel like I'm so appreciative of them.
Yeah.
I mean, they've changed my life, and they've, I don't know how to put it. It's like they're passing something on to me that I have to develop and practice myself. So that's kind of the second thing I would say. But at the same time, I wish to really do it justice. That's what I was saying. For me, it's a big responsibility, even calling myself a Buddhist teacher,
Mm-hmm.
because it means I I I should not augment this thing. But the problem is, we also have to make it bridgeable and relatable. And this is a tough job, because a lot of people, without realizing it, they make it relatable, and they equate that with sellable, you know, right? And this is the
Mm-hmm.
trick, And again, I'm not trying to bash on anyone else. We all got to do our thing. I kind of view us all as like we're all we have modern forms of financial slavery, and
Yeah.
so I don't know what to say about that. That's another conversation. So I don't fault anyone for doing what they need. It's just more internally, I've noticed when I shift from this mentality of like, how do you say it? When I'm trying to make like the Scott Tusa Buddhism or something like that, I notice my practice depreciates. And then actually the benefit I can give to others also depreciates, because there's more ego there. I mean, it's just really simple. It's not any kind of like virtue signal or anything. It's just there's more ego in that process. And the whole, for me, the ego is definitely not our amigo. And so understanding that is the whole principle of the Buddhist path. And also, like, for me, there's a deep dignity in the people I've had the privilege to meet, who I feel have done incredible work removing let's just say the harmful aspects of their ego clinging, and what's left is just a beautiful, open human being with a lot of heart and wisdom. And so, yeah, so that I said a lot, but that's kind of like one of my passions. That's why I started with that one.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you naming that. And I think it's really important to like ensure that we're staying connected to that lineage or those roots, right? Because I think
Yeah.
and I talk about this often, the idea that like when something becomes popularized, right? There's something, the good side of that or the benefit of that is like more people know about it. So more people are being introduced, they're getting connected to it. There's a level of curiosity and exploration. And sometimes when it spreads too quickly, then there's the instance that like, you know what? meditation just started in 2020, or this is something that's just new or just sort of came, and remembering, like noticing where we can sort of keep that cultural connection to it. Because to your point, I do feel like quite often we're incentivized to try to remix it and make it like
Exactly.
you got to have this new bow on it for it to be sellable, for it to be marketable. And so really thinking about ways, and I appreciate that, because I feel like that's a tension I have as I'm exploring it in my work as well, of like, cool, you kind of got to do the thing, but then also how do I stay true to the lineage and the culture that it comes from? Because I'm with you, like it feels like there's a respect and reverence that we have to hold, and responsibility almost, it feels like, right? As we're sort of like connecting to these practices and the cultures that they originate from.
Yeah, totally. No, no. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, and I think that tension you're mentioning, I find that really healthy.
Yeah.
Like when people don't have that tension, that's when I get concerned, actually.
Mm.
Um, and I think I realized I think I'm gonna have to live with that tension my whole life as long as I'm teaching. And if I'm not teaching, it's not an issue. I'm just a practitioner doing my thing. I'm just like trying to transform. But but yeah, and there's another element too where it's like these paths, as they just go so deep, and it takes time, and it takes mentoring, and so much gets passed down, right? I think I can't quote the study, but there's something where there's some kind of scientific study done, not like that has more merit necessarily, but where they discovered like close to 92%, 93%, something like that, give or take, that most of our communication is in that 93%, which is nonverbal. So verbal communication is only 5 to 8% of our communication. So much of that happens when we hang around the people or who are holding these lineage, whatever that is, whether that's in a Hindu tradition, Buddhist tradition, Taoist, whatever, when they're including a lot of people in plant medicine these days, people really want to go down that route. I'm like, go to the Amazon, go do that. Right. And but I think you got a point. Like we all have I mean, this is something I was thinking. I'm not sure if you said it, but we all have our gateway, and that's okay too. Like my gateway was secular mindfulness as well, sort of. And then Yogananda, and that's okay. And then some of us choose, okay, wow, I want to take this a little bit deeper. And some of us don't necessarily want to do that. And that's where, like you said, the beauty of like it being popular, it's a great thing, actually. I just think some of us out there, also those people who do want to take it deeper, it's not to police anything. It's more to, share some of I guess, my mistakes, say like, hey, watch out for this, because it can interrupt the transformation that we're doing, you know? Right. And I don't know, I just see like, man, I feel like I'm just starting to understand the Dharma. I'm not joking. After 24 years, I feel like I'm just starting to understand it. And it just takes time. And we have to spend time with these teachers and around them and getting the vibes and getting the teachings and practicing.
Yeah, I want to just name and appreciate that you named that. I feel like the more and more I study Buddhism and the Dharma, it's like the more and more I'm like, yeah, you know what? I really don't know a lot. Like there's not like it keeps like there's another text, and then there's another list, and then there's another thing. And it's like, but I appreciate that because it really helps satiate some of my curiosity. And there's something beautiful around that. And this is maybe a great question to ask you. For folks who might be interested in exploring the Dharma, like how can how can folks approach that curiosity without potentially getting overwhelmed?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, if they're going to approach an indigenous Buddhist lineage, Zen, Tibetan, Chinese Mahayana, Theravada, whatever, I don't know if there's a option not to get already overwhelmed. I think I don't know. I think in my case, it sounds like in your case too. We all go through our kind of that period, and I think there's also an enthusiasm we bring, and that's the kind of thing. Again, this is part of that bridge conversation. To me, it's the bridge isn't in changing the Dharma. The bridge is in working with our stuff and our kind of particular lenses. I don't know how you say it, habit patterns, the way we learn, the way we think, generally, and that's individual, and obviously it's not universal. But in the modern world, there are some things we all experience, especially the education system, and in understanding, like, how do we it's not really changing the way we do something. It's more being aware of a pattern, so then we can approach the Dharma and get less overwhelmed. Like for instance, like I find people get really overwhelmed if they, we like quick answers generally, depending on the person. I do. Initially I was like, I want to understand everything and I want to get it quickly. And then there's this tendency, right, where we have this lens, or maybe it's a unconscious bias that if I get it conceptually, then I get it, you know and as you know, in the Dharma, that's not getting it. Getting it is the experience that develops over time through practice. So I think, but the problem is we need that too. We usually call these the three wheels in traditional Buddhism: the wheel of learning, or listening, the wheel of reflection, and the wheel of meditation. And all of these wheels kind of need to go together. And so I think part of it, now to make it simple, sorry, I'm going on and on. Um, I think having a mentor and or some interest and energy put into how to integrate these three wheels right away. Because some people, they go too heavy into the meditation and they don't have enough information. So I call this: meditation will default to the lowest common denominator without some information to inform it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Mm,
it'll default to just wanting to feel better, which is fine in the beginning. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not going to bring us to enlightenment necessarily, or anything really transcendent. And some people don't want that. And that's cool.
yeah.
I'm not going to judge anyone for that. So, but eventually we need to inform the meditation with learning. And then you got people like me. I'm kind of a heady dude, obviously. I just want to get it, And then the meditation is a lot harder because it took me years to find out I had this big disconnect between my thinking mind and my body, and the practice happens a lot in the body, especially in these indigenous religions, especially in Vajrayana Buddhism. So for me, it's like, what I would tell someone is learn about how to do these three things and then take a simple topic and do it with that topic. You know what I mean? Right.
Yeah. You kind of bridged to my next question, which I was going to ask you. As I work with folks with meditation, quite often we get like, I tried it, but it didn't feel like it worked. And like, I keep getting blockages. I feel like that comes up quite often. Do you have any tips for folks who may be trying to integrate the practice of meditation into their, like, hey, I've seen the benefits. I heard it's something that'll be helpful, but it just don't seem to be working.
Yeah.
And I know there's like doesn't seem to be working, right? There's something to that too. But can you talk a little bit about, how we can approach meditation, even if we may be experiencing those roadblocks?
Yeah. I mean, I like your question because, to me, the first thing I hit when I'm working with someone one to one, or even if it's a question in a class or a group course retreat, is, what do you mean by working? Right? Like, so you already said something to that. You already spoke to that a little bit. I think that's the first thing to ask. Like, what are our assumptions of what meditation is supposed to do? And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago about, again, there's really good things with meditation getting popularized, right? And then there's also some growing pains with that, right? And one of the growing pains is, I think, meditation gets often put into this bag of like, oh, like going to the spa, or like learning to relax, right? And all this stuff. And it of course it can help with that. Um, and a lot, I would say the majority of people initially come to it for that reason. But also, in my experience, meditation is about cultivating awareness. And awareness is this quality of the mind that helps us to see more shit. You know what I mean? So, like, can I swear on your podcast? I apologize.
Yes, you absolutely can.
All right. I'm gonna try to keep. Someone called me at some point when I was still a monk. When I was giving Dharma talks, they called me the swearing monk or something. I was like, maybe that's not a good reputation to have. So maybe I should back off of that. Anyways, so there's this, we see more stuff, and that includes, stuff we like, and that includes stuff we don't like. And I think that's the surprise, and probably you found this out in your practice too. That's kind of the surprise that some people don't tell you, because what's pitched is this thing relax, feel better, blah, 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 you know? And the truth is, like I said, we can heal certain things. We can relax. We can get some benefits for just this life. Like I call that the healthy human being department, you know? And it's showing us also when we practice meditation authentically, or even just basic, even just secular mindfulness, we also see that life is dukkha. And if we're not prepared to see that, it's just like someone who goes and does a bunch of ayahuasca, you know, ayahuasca is not a fun experience for most people. I mean, sure, you can get insights and it's very rich, but it's painful. Why? Because it's showing you more stuff about your mind and habit patterns, you know? Meditation does that by itself, you know, as we progress in it, not right away, but over time. So I think to me, I see that as the biggest obstacle is like we might have some assumptions and then we're not getting what we want and then we think it's not working. So that's the first thing I say. But the second thing is maybe more practical for some of the audience listening. It goes back to this somatic piece, which is if meditation is not happening in the body, usually what we're doing is we're kind of if we're not learning how to work with what's uncomfortable too in the meditation, often what we're doing is we're unconsciously pushing down or trying to get rid of what's not relaxing or not, you know, I don't know, Zen or whatever people think. And this actually makes it worse because it's still that habit of stuffing down all the bad stuff, all the stuff we don't want to feel, all the uncomfort. And so we need to have practices and ways to work with those obstacles to integrate those. And so in the just sort of healthy human being side of meditation, I like to teach some of those things because um, yeah, I found them helpful, and they, you know, in my opinion, that really helps with those obstacles. Is sort of learning how to touch the and be with the parts that are uncomfortable just as much as the comfortable. And the pleasant side effect is we actually learn to be more grounded in our bodies. And when we're not, which is inevitable, we know how to come back. You know, I think that's really valuable.
Thank you for sharing that. And this, I feel like that kind of feeds into my last question,
Sure.
um, which I feel like I think more and more we're hearing more about the idea or concept of equanimity. You mind like deconstructing that a little bit in terms of like what equanimity is and maybe how that might also relate to a meditation practice?
Yeah. Yeah, equanimity is another big one. See, my problem, Shawn, is like, you know, I just simplifying things in the Dharma. Actually, for me, when I see a true master in the Buddhist tradition, it's not they simplify things without leaving out the profundity. That's hard to do in any kind of realm, you know, any area. That's hard to do, any discipline. But anyways, that's why I'm a little wordy. So I'm just making excuse for being wordy. I'm not a master, right? um, but anyways, yeah. So I like to look at equanimity in a few different ways. So I'll kind of present maybe two ways. One way is essentially it's a form of working with our internal biases. You know, I'm just naming that these days because it's language we're all, you know, coming to terms with. We're all understanding it's modern. I think it's a very direct way to understand what a non-equanimous mind is, and that's a mind that we usually talk about three different relationships where we hold bias, and the first one is those we hold close, like too close. Though, and then the second one is those we hold distant, right? Because we don't like them or we have an issue with them. And the third is those we're indifferent towards. It's not neutral. We're actually indifferent towards them. And if when we start to do meditation on equanimity, we quickly realize most of the world is in that third category, right? Um, and so in this coming from Tibetan Buddhist lineages, I didn't make this up, right? So when we look at it as a form of bias, we also see what does bias do in this realm, as it does in any realm. It actually creates constriction, pain, resistance, and disconnect for us, right? So it goes back to the dukkha thing, you know, the principle of dukkha, because the whole Buddhist path is about seeing how dukkha manifests on different levels and keeps us out of relationship, keeps us out of community, keeps us out of love, out of compassion, out of wisdom. I like framing it that way because it's not so heavy and negative. It's more like we're understanding, oh, there's this thing, there's an obstacle, there's a block in the way that we need to recognize. And so non-equanimity would be one of those blocks, or just bias, you know what I mean? And so we work on these three kinds of biases, which I think, I'm not going to say they necessarily help with all bias, but I think they do help pretty strongly, because it's sort of like we're working with those relationships. Every kind of, I might be wrong, but Buddhism believes every human relationship can go into one of those categories: someone we like, someone we dislike, someone we're indifferent towards. So we work on opening that up, asking questions, being willing to look at the bias, being willing to be wrong, right? Especially with the people we dislike. I mean, that's hard, right?
Yeah.
It's hard. So especially also with the people we like, because we're like, wait, I shouldn't like them now or something. No, we still want to love them. It's just that usually, that's related to the afflictive emotion of clinging. We usually use this term clinging in Buddhism. And, I think we could all see, like, clinging doesn't help us so much. Love helps us. Love is powerful. Love is a root, I mean, a profundity in our human life, right? In our world. But clinging is not love. And so we need to, a lot of equanimity practice is about distinguishing between these things, right? And the same with boundaries versus dislike or hate or disdain, right? So, someone who we don't need in our life, we need to make that distinction between where's the boundary with this person, because maybe they are actually harmful to us, verbally, physically, whatever, emotionally, and we can still love them, and with the indifferent category, I think that's just getting more interested in people. For me, this is kind of the bridge that works for me, just getting really interested in the human beings around me and in front of me, and both in conversation if I can, but also just, I like to watch people, not in a creepy way, but like, but just like, because I live in Mexico. I've lived in Latin America for the last 3 years, and it's very different, in my opinion, than the United States. And every Latin American country is obviously unique. I live between Mexico and Colombia, and they're very different countries actually, but some similarity too. But a lot of the times I'm just trying to figure out what's going on, like what's culturally going on here, and just staying really open-minded. And I think for me, equanimity practices help that, because I get to look both at my bias and also try to keep more of an open mind, as I'm working with my bias. So I think that's the main way equanimity practice, that's the main way I advise to do it these days. But also there's this other approach, which is this principle of Buddha nature in Buddhism, which is it's a big topic, but basically it's a principle that, at our very equality, how do you say it? Equality, Buddha nature means we're all equal, but it's tricky with this language in Buddhism because it relates to non-duality in Buddhism. And we're all equal because it's an equal beyond equal or not equal. You see what I'm saying? So it's
Mhm.
like Buddha nature, a lot of people use it and I'm not, I use it sometimes in this way, just to say like, oh, we have this root, that's this basis of mind that's pure and, already awake to some extent. We just need to connect with that through meditation and Dharma. That's a beautiful way to put it. And it's helpful as an entrance way. But the Buddha nature teachings go really deep because they have to intersect with Buddhist non-duality at some point. And this goes beyond labels. This goes beyond kind of our boxes of like something being equal or not equal or good or bad, right? And so Buddha nature is this thing, it's equal because equal or non-equal doesn't exist at the level of Buddha nature, right? So it's like the most equal thing you could get. It's like the infinite equality. I don't know how to put it. So Buddhism already has that premise, which is quite beautiful. And I think when we embody that premise, even though we might not live that premise, but when we come with that intention to realize that, then the equanimity practice takes on another flavor, because we're talking about we're trying to work with some root of what we fundamentally are that's so much deeper than what we see on the surface with most people, you know?
God, thank you. This is, I think that's a good place to stop, because what I'm going to say is, how can my listeners get in touch with you? if they want further exploration. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so probably the best way is through my website, just my name, scotttusa.com. There's 3 T's in the website. Scotttusa.com. As you already said, I got a YouTube channel. I post a lot of content on there, free content as well as a podcast through Spotify and all that, called the Buddhist Wisdom Podcast. But yeah, my website also has a bunch of articles and stuff like that, and people can reach out there. Yeah.
Perfect. For those that are listening, click down in the show notes. You can click all the links. They'll be accompanied in the bottom. If you're listening or watching on YouTube, click in the description is there. Click on the links, use them. Scott, thank you so much for taking this time. It really means a lot just to be in connection with you and in conversation. This has been a really enlightening conversation, to say the least.
Oh, my pleasure, Shawn. Yeah, it's been a joy. Thanks for inviting me on here. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Hey, Rebels, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Mindful Rebel podcast. Remember, after this listen, ask yourself where wisdom can meet practice and where compassion can meet action. Take a moment today to reflect on what resonated with you in this episode. Now, if you're feeling that rebel spirit, I'd invite you to like and share this episode. Your support helps spread the message of mindfulness, self-inquiry, and self-discovery. And if you're feeling extra generous, and I know you are, leave a rating and a review of the podcast. It helps others find this resource on their own mindfulness journey. May you move into the rest of your day with a greater sense of peace, clarity, and freedom.